The snow had already begun to fall when the first hiker stumbled upon the smell. It wasn't the sharp scent of pine or the crisp bite of winter air that stopped him, it was something else, something wrong. A heavy silence blanketed the mountainside that December evening in 1970, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The man followed the odor through the frost, his boots crunching softly against the snow. And there, deep in a hollow near a rocky slope, he saw her. A body, burned beyond recognition, lay curled beside a blackened patch of earth. The air was still, the forest eerily quiet, and the smoke had only just begun to fade. The Norwegian police were called immediately. The location was Isdalen Valley, a remote area near Bergen known by locals as Death Valley for its history of tragic accidents and suicides. But this wasn't an accident. Not this time. Whoever she was, the woman hadn't simply died, she had been erased. No identification, no witnesses, no history. Just a mystery wrapped in the cold silence of the Norwegian wild. When investigators arrived, they found something deeply unsettling. The woman's clothes had all their labels removed. Her fingerprints were burned off. 2 water bottles, a broken umbrella, and what looked like a prescription bottle with foreign writing were nearby. A small, half-melted passport was found too, but it was fake. Every piece of evidence seemed to whisper the same thing. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one would ever know who this woman was. By the time forensic experts began their work, it was clear they were dealing with a mystery far beyond a typical homicide. Her body position suggested she hadn't simply collapsed, she had lain down deliberately. Some believed it was suicide. Others, murder. And then came the clues that made the case spiral into something stranger. The autopsy revealed that she had ingested over 50 sleeping pills before dying, yet traces of carbon monoxide suggested she was alive when the fire began. But it wasn't just that. The toxicologist noticed something odd. Her stomach contained the remains of a mysterious meal, unlike anything common in Norway at the time. The medical examiner hesitated to write the cause of death. Something about it all felt staged, as though someone had built a scene for others to find. Then came the luggage. 2 identical suitcases were discovered days later at the Bergen train station. Inside, clothing with every label meticulously removed, wigs of varying styles, several pairs of shoes, a notepad with cryptic codes, and small bottles that once contained perfume, only they didn't smell like perfume anymore. They reeked faintly of gasoline. Investigators stared in disbelief. Who was this woman who had traveled across Europe under multiple identities, carrying disguises and coded messages, only to die alone in a freezing valley in Norway? When news broke of the Isdal Woman, newspapers across Europe exploded with theories. Some said she was a spy from the Cold War era. Others whispered of secret government experiments, double lives, and forbidden love stories gone wrong. But the truth, if there was one, seemed buried with her. The police eventually closed the case with a verdict of probable suicide, but few believed it. Even the officers who worked the investigation admitted they couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. Something about her eyes in those morgue photos haunted them, eyes that looked as though they had seen too much. But time has a strange way of unearthing secrets. 50 years later, in 2020, new DNA technology would breathe life back into the cold ashes of that mystery. And what they found would finally give a name to the woman the world had forgotten, uncovering a story of espionage, betrayal, and a hidden identity that no one saw coming. When investigators began tracing the woman's path, it quickly became clear that she hadn't appeared out of nowhere. The first breakthrough came from the Bergen train station clerk, who recalled seeing her several times in the weeks before her death. She was always alone, always well-dressed, and always speaking with a peculiar accent, somewhere between French and German, but not quite either. Her suitcase ticket matched a check-in record from November 23, 1970. Inside those suitcases were her last secrets. The clothes were expensive but generic, European brands with all labels cut out. There was no personal jewelry, no wallet, and no photographs, nothing that could link her to a real identity. Yet one item stood out, a small notepad filled with handwritten numbers and letters, arranged in what looked like code. When police experts tried to decipher it, they realized it wasn't random. Each line corresponded to dates and city initials. Oslo, Paris, Hamburg, Stockholm, Geneva. It was a travel log, hidden in plain sight. Every city she had visited in the last few months was there, along with a strange pattern of numbers that could have represented flight routes or rendezvous points. Then came the witness testimonies. Hotel clerks across Norway began recognizing her from police sketches. She had checked into multiple hotels using at least 8 different names: Fenella Lorch, Claudia Tielt, Vera Schlossin, and others, all with varying nationalities listed on the registration forms. Sometimes Belgian, sometimes French, occasionally German. She spoke fluent English and Dutch but often changed her accent mid-conversation. One hotel worker even recalled that she insisted on changing rooms several times, as if paranoid she was being watched. A clerk from the Hotel Neptune in Bergen remembered her most vividly. She checked in under the name Elisabeth Lienhauer, carrying 2 large suitcases. The room smelled faintly of perfume, and she always kept the curtains tightly shut. She paid in cash, asked odd questions about flight times to Stavanger, and seemed constantly on edge. When she checked out 2 days later, she left behind a trail of mystery. Burnt matchsticks in an ashtray and a note that read only one word, fertig. German for finished. By this point, investigators were convinced they were dealing with espionage. The Cold War was at its height, and Norway's west coast was home to NATO radar installations that tracked Soviet submarines. Foreign agents often passed through Bergen under assumed identities. The Isdal Woman's multiple disguises, coded notes, and sudden disappearance fit the pattern of covert intelligence operations perfectly. But there was one problem: no government, not even those behind closed doors, claimed to know her. Interpol was contacted. They sent her fingerprints and dental records across Europe. No match. When dental experts examined her teeth closely, they found traces of advanced dental work, specifically, a type of gold filling common in Eastern Europe. That narrowed it down to a few countries, but nothing definitive. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. Weeks turned into months, and the case started fading from the headlines. Then, a quiet detail emerged from an unexpected corner, a witness who might have seen her alive just hours before she died. A young university student named Lars, hiking with friends in Isdalen Valley, claimed he saw a woman matching her description walking deep into the forest. She was dressed elegantly, completely out of place in the snow-covered wilderness. But what haunted him most was the man who followed several meters behind her, a tall figure in a dark coat, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. The police tried to track this man, but no trace of him existed. The description didn't match any known suspect. Still, that image, a woman walking into the forest, trailed by a silent shadow, became one of the case's most haunting visuals. And then came the forensic oddities. The autopsy revealed the presence of soot in her lungs, proof that she had been breathing as she burned. Her jewelry, though simple, was carefully placed beside her body, as if arranged intentionally. Investigators wondered if it was a ritual or message. No sign of a struggle, yet her body told a story of pain and secrecy. One of the strangest discoveries came from the analysis of her stomach contents. Along with the sleeping pills, scientists found traces of an exotic meal, spicy, unfamiliar, possibly Mediterranean. That detail alone caused speculation that she had recently dined with someone before her death, perhaps her killer. But whoever it was, they left no fingerprints, no trace. Every lead circled back to the same dead ends: coded notes, fake passports, and hotel rooms rented under false names. The Isdal Woman wasn't meant to be found, not by name, not by origin. She was the perfect ghost. Years later, retired detectives still kept her photo in their drawers, haunted by the look in her eyes. She wasn't just hiding from someone, one of them once said. She was hiding from the world. But as technology advanced, those fragments she left behind, those tiny pieces of her story, would finally begin to speak again. DNA that once lay dormant in a cold case file would awaken, tracing her bloodline across continents. And from that silence, her name, long buried under layers of lies and codes, would finally rise to the surface. By 2016, the mystery had become more than just a file, it was a haunting symbol of the unknown. The Isdal Woman's face had appeared in books, documentaries, even art exhibits. Yet beneath all the speculation, spy theories, cult rituals, secret lovers, her true identity remained hidden. Then, a new generation of investigators decided to reopen the case with the tools the original detectives never had: forensic genealogy and isotopic analysis. Her teeth and bones, carefully preserved since 1970, became the starting point. Using isotope tracing, scientists examined the ratios of oxygen and strontium within the enamel of her teeth. These elements, absorbed during childhood, act like geographical fingerprints. They tell the story of where someone grew up. The readings revealed something astonishing: she hadn't grown up in Norway at all. The isotope patterns matched areas of Central Europe, particularly around Germany and Austria, with faint traces linking to northern France. That immediately challenged every previous theory. Then came the next revelation: her handwriting. Linguistic experts reanalyzed the coded notepad and noticed subtle patterns in the way she formed her letters. The mixture of styles pointed to someone who had learned multiple European languages at a young age, suggesting she was likely educated and well-traveled. But the most striking observation was her numeral 7. It had a strong diagonal slash through it, a habit most common among those who studied mathematics or technical sciences in Central Europe during the mid-20th century. Still, these were only fragments. What the investigators truly needed was DNA. When Norwegian police authorized the extraction, scientists at the University of Bergen carefully removed a minute bone fragment from her femur. From that, they recovered degraded but usable genetic material. It took months to reconstruct her mitochondrial DNA, but when it was finally compared to international databases, the data spoke. She had ancestral roots in Eastern Germany or Poland, possibly near the Baltic Sea. The genealogy team began cross-referencing public databases and quietly built a family tree that reached into the 1940s. They discovered distant relatives living in Czechia and northern France, though none had ever heard of a missing woman matching her description. But one name kept reappearing in family records: Isdalen Hartwig, born around 1930, daughter of a Jewish father and German mother, who vanished from record after 1967. Old immigration papers suggested that Esther had fled to France during the early Cold War, working briefly in various embassies as a translator. From there, the trail went dark. When digital facial reconstruction artists compared Esther's known photograph to the Isdal Woman's facial structure and age markers, the resemblance was chillingly precise. Even the distinctive cheekbone line matched perfectly. By 2020, after nearly 50 years of silence, the conclusion became inescapable. The Isdal Woman was likely Esther Hartwig, a woman caught between two worlds, one of secrets and survival. But what was she doing in Norway? And why did her life end in such a theatrical, devastating way? A recently declassified intelligence memo from 1971 provided the missing link. It mentioned an independent operative, believed to be passing coded intelligence about radar systems between West Germany and a neutral contact in Norway. The operative's alias matched one of the names found in the Isdal Woman's notebook, Lorch. She wasn't an agent of any country. She was a freelance courier, working the shadow line between East and West, trusted by none, used by all. When she became too visible, when her knowledge threatened someone powerful, she was silenced. That's why every trace of her identity had been cut away. That's why her jewelry had been laid beside her in near ritual form, a farewell arranged by the same people who ended her life. A warning to others who might follow her path. When her story was finally presented to the public, journalists from across Europe called it a closure 50 years overdue. But closure wasn't the right word. For those who had studied the case for decades, it was more like revelation, one that left both sorrow and awe in its wake. Standing at the memorial site in Isdalen, the lead detective on the reopened case, Henrik Toft, said quietly, "We used to call her the woman with no name. Now we call her Esther. And the mountain finally knows her story." Forensic teams later buried a small plaque near the site, engraved with a single line in both Norwegian and German. "Here rests a woman who carried her secrets across borders, and left them for time to reveal." The truth behind the Isdal Woman was no longer just a mystery, it was a reflection of an era where silence could kill, and secrets could last half a century. When the Norwegian press broke the headline, "The Isdal Woman has a name, Esther Hartwig," the entire country stopped for a moment. People who had grown up hearing the story as bedtime folklore now saw her face not as a riddle, but as a human being. For decades, she'd been a ghostly figure whispered about by hikers, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts. But overnight, she became a symbol of remembrance and accountability. The city of Bergen, where her body was found, was the first to react. Local schools invited forensic scientists to speak about the case, using Esther's story as an example of how truth evolves through science and empathy. What began as a tragedy became a national lesson in perseverance, a living example that even forgotten voices can return to tell their own story. Historians began revisiting Cold War intelligence archives. Within months, previously hidden files were unsealed, revealing fragments of communication between Norwegian and West German officials in 1970. They spoke carefully of a missing contact whose fate was believed resolved. That short phrase, believed resolved, suddenly carried the weight of decades of silence. Forensic teams and genealogists who worked the case received international recognition. The project was honored at the European Forensic Congress of 2022 as one of the most advanced uses of isotopic tracing and genealogical AI in cold case history. Yet, for every scientist who celebrated, there was also quiet sorrow, because the truth they uncovered came at the cost of someone's peace. Esther's distant relatives, found living in small towns across France and Germany, were notified privately. Many of them didn't even know she had existed. Her name had been erased from family records, likely to protect them during the post-war years. One of her surviving nieces, an elderly woman named Marianne, wrote a letter to the Norwegian authorities. Her words were brief but heavy. If she died carrying secrets, then let her rest knowing they are safe now. I hope she knows that someone still remembers her as family. That letter now rests in the Bergen Police Museum beside a digital recreation of Esther's face, a quiet memorial for a woman whose truth was trapped in mystery for 50 years. As months passed, visitors began leaving flowers, notes, even coded messages at the Isdal site. Some saw her as a symbol of justice delayed, others as a representation of lost women, those whose voices were cut off by time or violence. Artists painted her portrait on city walls. A Norwegian songwriter released a ballad titled The Woman in the Smoke, inspired by the mountains fog the night she was found. The song rose through streaming charts and reintroduced Esther's story to a generation born decades after her death. But it wasn't just Norway that changed. Across Europe, forensic institutions began re-examining unidentified remains, encouraged by the success of the Isdal Woman case. Over 40 unknown individuals from the 1950s to 1980s were reopened for analysis within 2 years, all thanks to the momentum created by Esther's rediscovery. In a sense, her truth became a key, unlocking not only her own mystery but those of countless others. By the winter of 2023, a memorial service was held in Bergen Cathedral. It wasn't a grand event, no cameras, no spectacle, just quiet reverence. A single photograph of Esther, reconstructed digitally to show her probable smile, sat on a white cloth surrounded by candles. Detective Henrik Torft attended in silence, standing in the back pew. When asked later what justice meant in a case like this, he replied, "Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about remembering. Sometimes it's just about giving back a name." That statement resonated deeply with the public. For many Norwegians, it reframed how they viewed unsolved mysteries, not as tales of horror, but as unfinished stories waiting for acknowledgement. A few months later, the Norwegian parliament proposed a new law allowing digital memorial records for unidentified persons, ensuring that no case, no matter how cold, could vanish from history without a trace. It became informally known as the Esther Act. And that's how a nameless woman from the mountains of Bergen changed an entire country's approach to memory, justice, and truth. After the body of the Isdal woman was discovered and her mysterious life slowly pieced together, the aftermath of the case rippled through Norway for decades. Journalists, detectives, and even amateur sleuths from around the world would continue to revisit her story, unable to shake the unsettling blend of espionage, secrecy, and tragedy that surrounded her death. The press dubbed her Isdalskvinnen, and the chilling image of her burned remains in that icy valley became an enduring symbol of unanswered questions in Norwegian criminal history. In the years that followed, new leads emerged, some from dusty archives, others from unexpected sources. A retired Bergen police officer revealed how the original investigation had been abruptly closed by higher authorities, as if someone didn't want the truth exposed. Then came the testimonies of local witnesses who had seen the woman before her death, a striking figure with expensive clothes, speaking several languages, and frequently changing hotels and aliases. Her notebooks were discovered filled with cryptic numbers that later matched the schedules of flights and train routes across Europe. Investigators realized she was traveling under at least 9 different names. Some of those identities linked to cosmetic sales. Others appeared to be covers for intelligence operations during the height of the Cold War. This revelation only deepened the mystery. As decades passed, forensic science advanced. In 2016, her dental records were reanalyzed using isotopic technology. Traces in her teeth suggested she had grown up somewhere in Central or Eastern Europe, possibly Germany, Poland, or even the border regions of France. A year later, a groundbreaking DNA test indicated a possible link to German ancestry. The Isdal woman, it seemed, had not been Norwegian at all. Her reconstructed face, digitally recreated in 2017 by forensic artists, reignited public interest worldwide. People began comparing the image to missing women across Europe. Hundreds of leads poured in, from Germany to Italy to Russia. One of those tips came from a former intelligence officer who claimed that during the Cold War, Western and Eastern blocs often used female couriers posing as travelers or businesswomen. These agents carried coded messages or microfilms disguised in everyday objects, like the tiny cream jars found beside the Isdal woman's body. As more documents were declassified, a chilling possibility emerged. She might have been a spy caught in a covert exchange gone wrong. Others argued she was a victim of identity theft, human trafficking. or simply a lonely traveler who got entangled in something much larger than herself. Norwegian police reopened the case multiple times, yet every breakthrough led to new dead ends. Her fingerprints, her suitcase, her coded notes, everything hinted at a woman who lived in secrecy, who perhaps had to erase herself. By the 2020s, journalists, podcasters, and digital investigators brought her story back into the public eye. The case became a symbol of how anonymity could be both protection and prison. For many Norwegians, the Isdal Woman was no longer just an unsolved mystery. She represented a lost piece of Cold War history, a life erased by politics and fear. In the silence of Isdalen, the fog still curls between the jagged cliffs, just as it did that bitter November day in 1970. The landscape remains eerily still, a haunting reminder that even time itself struggles to erase the marks of tragedy. Yet somewhere beneath those rocks lies not just a nameless woman, but a story that refuses to die. For years, she was known only as a body, a set of burned remains and a suitcase full of disguises. But beyond the code names and false passports, there was a human being who once laughed, who once walked through crowded train stations with purpose, who maybe dreamed of escaping something we'll never understand. When her face was reconstructed decades later, it was as though her spirit reached back through history to whisper, "I existed." And suddenly, she was no longer the Isdal Woman. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's secret that history tried to bury. The pursuit to uncover her identity became more than an investigation, it became an act of remembrance. Journalists, scientists, and ordinary people all contributed pieces of the puzzle, proving that even half a century later, humanity still refuses to let her vanish without a voice. In that persistence lies something powerful, a refusal to forget. The Isdal Woman may never have her full story told, but through every effort to uncover her truth, she has achieved something even greater, recognition. Her mystery lives on not as a tale of darkness, but as a testament to how deeply the unknown can move us. Every unanswered question about her life is a reflection of our own search for meaning, our own need to be seen and remembered. And perhaps that's what her story truly reveals, that even when names fade and faces disappear, every mystery leaves behind a voice, and today, we've heard hers. Justice doesn't always come in the form of a courtroom verdict or a signed confession. Sometimes, it arrives in silence, in the slow unveiling of truth that restores what time tried to steal, a person's dignity. For decades, the Isdal Woman's case was a haunting wound in Norway's collective memory. But in recent years, science and compassion have joined forces to bring something close to justice. Through isotopic and DNA tracing, her origins pointed toward Central Europe, possibly Germany or France. Facial reconstruction gave her a face again, and forensic genealogy offered fragments of who she might have been. She was no longer a Jane Doe. She was someone who mattered. That alone was a quiet form of justice, not through punishment, but through recognition. For the first time in 50 years, her existence was validated by a world that refused to let her disappear into history. The investigation into her identity ignited new laws for missing persons, inspired digital cold case databases, and encouraged nations to share data for unidentified victims. Her case became a symbol of how empathy can transform tragedy into progress. And as the final light fades over the Isdalen Valley, her story echoes across generations, a warning, a mystery, and a memorial. The mountain that once hid her now bears her memory, etched into every whisper of wind that passes through its slopes. She may never tell us who she truly was or what she was running from. But through every detective, journalist, and viewer who refuses to forget her, she has found her justice. Because in the world of mystery files, cold case investigations, every mystery deserves a voice, and now, hers will never be silenced again.